All right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Switching it up today, we're in the center atrium where we like to gather and have even more engagement from all of you for the third stakeholder faculty dialogue of this spring's lecture series. And I'm really pleased to introduce really two people who I'm thrilled are now in dialogue with one another and with our program in the PMCI. So today we're going to have our very own Professor Ifeoma Ebo, who will be in dialogue with Michelle Bishop, who is the brilliant mind and community activist and artist and thinker behind Harlem Needle Arts. This is a long time coming, and I think these two practices are very complementary. Having a fair amount of familiarity and work with Ifeoma and her practice, which is really involved and interested in weaving and craft. And then we have really a Harlem institution in the person of Michelle Bishop, whose work uplifts the textile arts and really connects that to a cultural conversation in places like Harlem and the Caribbean and elsewhere. So without further ado, Ifeoma and Michelle.
Thank you, and I'm quite excited that Michelle's here. We've got lovely things to show you guys, and for those in my section, we'll be heading upstairs afterwards for a workshop. Anyone else from other sections, you're free to join us. We have limited supplies though. All right, so again, my name is Ifeoma Ebo. I have my own practice, Creative Urban Alchemy, which is a Brooklyn-based practice centering, working at the intersection of art, architecture, urban design, and planning. We do education, advocacy, design, and planning. I'll show you a little bit of projects from those different sort of sectors. This is the range of services that we offer, but I will focus more on the public art and public space right now. But our practice centers cultural heritage and equity, and we have a deep community engagement aspect of our practice. Our practice is participatory. But before I go into the work from my practice, I'll talk a little bit about my own sort of journey in my own career as in architecture. I spent a few years working in South Africa, working for Architecture for Humanity. Has anybody heard of Architecture for Humanity? Yeah, it's kind of died away. It's no longer in existence. But it went strong for 10 years, and they would work with a network of architects around the world to provide architectural services to the most needy around the world, really. So I spent a few years in South Africa, right after the World Cup in FIFA, working with architects there to develop 20 community centers across the continent, and they all centered on football, health, and education. These are the 20 centers, but I'll focus on a few of them. This is one in Mali, and what I've been talking to my section in particular has been just looking at how modern architects are tapping into craft and traditional building methods in Africa in particular, but also in the United States, tapping into traditional African methods to design and build new buildings. And so this project was really all about it. It's really about, these 20 projects are all of them very different. They all have the same program, but they're all tapping into the traditional building methods in each region. So this is Mali in particular, working with Yusuf Bert of Quart Architecture and Design, and really tapping into traditional, the use of this natural stones in the site, the use of thatch roofing, and these are traditional building methods, but creating a new community center using that methodology and really tapping into the way that people know how to build traditionally in their particular region. And each community center was accompanied by a small soccer field that provided a new open space to the communities, but then also infrastructure resources, lighting, electricity, power, et cetera, and so forth. This is the community center in Ghana. And one of their traditional building methods or tools or materials is using bamboo. And this is almost, it looks like it's woven in itself, but using bamboo strategically to allow sunlight to enter into the space, but then also designing in a way that allows for local builders to use their own expertise. Again, each space is associated with a football field that really provide active use for spaces that had not been used in a long time. So fast forward to my experience working in city government. I led an initiative to transform public spaces in and around public housing in New York City. So we worked around a lot of public housing, New York City Housing Authority housing, really working with youth to think about how to light up the night. And so this is a lantern initiative we did where we worked with Arab, who's a large engineering firm based here in New York and around the world. And we did these workshops with kids. We also transformed spaces using light and music and really trying to do things out of the box and to battle the rules and regulations around how you can use open space. In some parks, you can't use space after 10 p.m., you can't listen to music. So we had a silent DJ party here. So much of my work is also about using art in creative ways to activate space. This was a project where we worked with teenagers, all the teenagers you see in the image, to create unique lighting approaches, but then also projecting their art into public space. Using projectors and sensor-based lighting. So the more you walked near the lighting, the more it activated at night, creating a spectacle and encouraging people to experience the outdoors at night. So you guys saw this project before with Jerome Hayford Studio. This is a project that we recently completed at the end of last year. Migration, which is 35 sculptures across the Kingsborough houses development, public housing development in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And through this process, we interviewed residents, so there was an oral storytelling component of this project. We interviewed residents, we got quotes from them, we also captured young people dancing. And so a lot of the figures that you see on the sculptures and the words are some of the interviews. We also had the young people write poems and battle raps, and so their battle raps got integrated into the artwork. And so what I'm trying to show here is just a series of projects that are really tapping into the creative agency of community, whether it's their stories of the past, their dreams of the future, the ways in which they draw and make, their dancing, their culture, and really coming up with creative ways of integrating all of that content, really that spatial intelligence, into the design of buildings and the design of sculptures and art pieces. So fast forward again, this is a project that I worked on in collaboration with the Flatbush African Burial Ground Coalition. They are a coalition of stewards that are stewarding a newly rediscovered burial ground in central Brooklyn. And so we did an experimental workshop with them where we used Midjourney. Anybody familiar with Midjourney? It's an AI tool. We used Midjourney. We had 30 people, divided them up into separate rooms. We had some students from City College who came in and helped us to drive the Midjourney. So each room had a person at a computer. And we would just let people talk about what they wanted to see the burial ground transform into the future. And as they were talking, key words that they would say, the person driving the Midjourney at the computer would create prompts. And those prompts generated some of these images that you see here. And these images are reflective of people wanting to see African art integrated into their work. Myself, I explored traditional Nigerian art because I am Nigerian American. And so some of these images are also reflecting traditional Nigerian art integrated into natural building materials in an open space. And then each image is also reflective of some activities that people want to do, which is like collective meditation, interacting with nature, engaging in drum circles, experiencing traditional African cosmology, and then each image was printed onto fabric and manipulated. So what you're seeing is not the original AI image. It's a collage that it brings in African fabrics, such as Ankara fabric, which you see what I'm wearing here, and then also different kinds of woven fabrics. On the right-hand side is a shoke, which is a woven fabric. On the left-hand side is my own crochet technique and other kinds of the shiny material. You see the blue and yellow shiny material are fabrics that African women use to create head ties. So it has a bit of structure to it. So each of these collages / visual representations are really trying to tap into the craft of the past, but then also technological advancement of the future by using AI. I use these tapestries, I refer to them as tapestries because they are hung and not really like used to keep yourself warm, but the idea is that you can create a space for healing. And this is what this process resulted in, was this installation that is a space for reparations, repair, a space for repair where one can go and rest. And it's located in the Flatbush Central Caribbean Marketplace, which is not different than the Shabazz Marketplace. It has this very similar story where it started outside, it started in a parking lot, and it was created by immigrants, Caribbean immigrants in particular. This is in central Brooklyn. And then eventually was developed into a marketplace, eventually developed into a multi-story mixed-use building with market on the ground floor and housing above, which is what they're planning to do at the Shabazz Market. So this just gives you a little example of what that could look like. And all of the original vendors that used to come to the parking lot to sell their things, they were given space, affordable space inside this marketplace. And I think it's a very similar relationship that they're planning for with the Shabazz Market. The same exhibition I took to Nigeria for a intercontinental dialogue, African diasporic dialogue about what does it mean to design healing spaces, what does it mean to center cultural heritage in your work, and how can AI be a tool or advanced technology be a tool for taking us into, I guess, a Wakanda of the future. These are just some other images of the two spaces. That is in Abuja, Nigeria, at the African University of Science and Technology, and this is at the Flatbush Central Caribbean Marketplace. So what we found is that the healing space in the Caribbean Marketplace became a place where young people like to hang out, where they felt safe, where they felt like they could just relax and not feel like they were a nuisance in public space. And so each of the exhibitions really had some interesting conversations and dialogues about what is an African burial ground, where do you bury your dead, and how do you commemorate these spaces. So I want to show a bit of work that's connected from a studio that I taught here 2024, and it was a studio of graduate students, a mixture of landscape architecture and architecture students, and the site was the Flatbush African Burial Ground, and the seminar was using a very similar approach that I used for the creation of my tapestries, but it was for the design of transforming the African burial ground in the year 3000. So we had a weaving artist that came for over 4 weeks that did workshops on weaving, teaching the students how to use a loom and how to weave. And then they used weaving in many different approaches to create their site models. So these are site models for the Flatbush African Burial Ground, using paper and found objects in the community. So a lot of found objects that they found were flyers for parties, flyers for soca dance parties and whatnot in Central Brooklyn, which is actually, you see a lot of that, a lot of Caribbean concerts. And so they took all those flyers and created, used that as material for these woven site models. Another team actually created a quilt out of the base of their model. So the streets, the sidewalks, all of that is made out of jean material and felt, and then used plaster for the buildings and integrated different found objects that they found in the community. This team in particular, since the burial ground has a lot of history and many layers of history, they created the site as if it was a drawer, and each drawer pulls out with a textile that shows some information about the history of the burial ground. And finally, this team created a loom out of the site where they wove the streets, interwoven in the streets using yarn, using nails to hold it in place, but then also using wood to reflect the different eras of history around the burial ground and sort of representing it in a way that the history from the burial ground sort of oozes out and impacts all of the architecture around it. They also experimented with materials, really tapping into Afro-Indigenous material use, and so sort of replicating the use of adobe to create features that would exist in the space. So this is one feature that's almost like a wall, that can also be a seat, that can also be a place for animals to perch in, to live in. This student, Jimena, who actually is now working for me as a designer, she designed this shade structure that it's made with beadwork. And the idea was that there would be a ritual of every season. You come and put the beads, people could come and put the beads in, and that it can serve as this shade structure. But you can see that there's this process that each of them have explored where they're sketching the idea, they're bringing that idea into AI, seeing and partnering with AI in the co-creation of that idea, and then building a model to represent what it looks like using materials that they're seeing in the context, in the community. And then this student took weaving to the next level and created these walls that could also be fence work around the burial ground. And these, again, are a mixture of landscape architecture and architecture students. The student is looking at weaving. She sketched some weaving ideas, brought it into AI, and then created these models of what seating around the burial ground could look like. So again, the same sort of process of looking at and analyzing craft, traditional craft, and exploring how that traditional craft can be transformed into an object that you can inhabit or sit in at the human scale. Again, more weaving, sort of exploring the integration of a teepee with a shelter space. And this student is also looking at weaving, creating a canopy, a series of canopies that could be inhabited on the outside or inside of the space. Another version, sort of looking at the baskets, woven baskets, and transforming it into a space for observing artwork at the burial ground. So now we're fast forwarding again to a project I'm currently working on. Has anybody heard of the Weeksville Heritage Center? Yeah, Weeksville is located in central Brooklyn. It is the first free Black community established in Brooklyn. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but New York City was one of the largest slaveholders, one of the largest holders of enslaved people in the United States, outside of South Carolina. So this whole New York used to be a place where people farmed, they grew different materials, different things for making fabric, linen, et cetera, and so forth. And so at the end of enslavement in the 1800s, many Black people formed their own communities, their own places where they could feel safe, where they could build their own generational wealth, and this was one of them that was established. So some of the homes, which you see in the center there, are the homes that were actually built by people who were formerly enslaved, who were then free and established their own communities. So then a new community center, which are the buildings you see on the left-hand side, were built in the late 1900s. I can't believe I'm saying that. The late 1900s, in order to commemorate this space. And so there's a number, Caples Jefferson is the architect, and Elizabeth Kennedy is the landscape architect for this project. And so we were exploring, I was commissioned to design a shade structure for that, very similar to the shade structures that you saw in the other examples. And so this was an exercise where people got to identify where they would want those shade structures to be located on the site. They often have celebrations and events. And as a part of our community engagement process, we did a batik making workshop. Does anybody know what a batik is? Batiks were started in Indonesia, but also moved to West Africa. It's a technique of using hot wax and dyes to dye fabric. You see them in many different places. You see them in the Caribbean, you see them in parts of Asia, different parts of Africa. And they are also a tool for storytelling. They tell you stories of the past, they tell you the stories of the present. And so we went through this process of creating batiks, and we had a range of people, from kids to old people, that's my mother, right there, to men and women, and all different types of people creating batiks. And this is what came out of that process, a beautiful array of different, vibrant colored batiks that we're then going to use and print onto fabric as the canopy for the shade structure. So these are just the ideas that we provided to people to get them to vote on which were the ideas that resonated for them, the type of shade structure they wanted to see. And people wanted to see diverse colors, they wanted to see fabrics integrated, so we took that to heart. They also wanted to see a design that sort of reflected craft, traditional craft. So we threw all of that into AI. And see what AI generated, and this is what AI generated, which is kind of a beginning for our process. So these are just some examples of what we've been exploring, thinking about, and they want a shade structure that can be moved. So we're creating something that can integrate the different designs that came out of the batik workshop, a structure that can be picked up and moved to another place, so there are no footings integrated into it. And so this is the final design that it's resulted in, and it comes apart into two pieces, but then also can come together into one piece. It has a bench for seniors if they don't want to sit down. It also has a space if people want to sit down. But again, very similar to the other ideas that I shared, it's really tapping into traditional craft. It's tapping into community creative agency to create some of the ideas for the canopies. And then in the base of it, we are integrating oyster shells. And we're integrating oyster shells in particular because it used to be a tool for commercial exchange for the Black communities in New York. It also was one of the first Black businesses that were established after enslavement were oystermen. And so we're paying homage to that by integrating oysters. And so at the end of this month, we're going to have another workshop at Weeksville Heritage Center, where people will paint the oyster shells and we'll integrate them into the final art piece. So thank you. I will pass it over to Michelle Bishop, who's going to bless us with her amazing work.
Back, so this is cut off. We were further away from the screen.
Thank you. Okay. Closer.
Closer.
There we go. And I'm going to put this.
Is there like a little deviation?
Okay.
I think this is fine.
That's good. Thank you all. It's great to be here. I'm Michelle Bishop. I come from a legacy of being African by way of Barbados, by way of Harlem. I was born in Harlem, but moved to Barbados when I was 2 years old, came back when I was about 6 years old, and then every year after that until I was about 12. At 12 years old, that's when the prices for the tickets go up and I officially become an adult. So mom and dad were like, 2 more years, you get your working papers and then you can work. And so, but then I went every other year mostly until I graduated high school, and then I was on my own. I am a product and a proud product of John F. Kennedy High School, which is in the Bronx. It It was a phenomenal high school. It was not a specialized high school. However, it had many elements of specialties. And so I'm a product of a lot of those specialties. I am the child of, I should say I come from a legacy of my aunt, my great aunt, who was a seamstress. At the age of 16, she did not want to go to ABC, America, Britain, or Canada. She wanted to stay in Barbados, as many of our family members went abroad. So she decided she was going to save up enough money. Her father helped her to buy a sewing machine, and she never did anything else but sew. She was a seamstress. She did upholstery and drapery for all of her life until she passed away. And the treadle machine, so a treadle machine is a machine that does not have electricity, and that machine still exists. I think sometime maybe in the late 60s, maybe the early 70s, a motor was put on the machine, but it still exists. It's a Singer machine and it works. And in places where all over the world that don't have electricity, those machines produce some of the most fabulous work. So I started Harlem Needle Arts out of a love for seeing all the creative people that I was around. There's a huge cultural community in New York. There's the Dance Africa Festival, the International African Art Festival. In Philly, there's the Odunde Festival. In Maryland, in the DC area, they have all their festivals. And all the people that I've been around since I was about 21 years old were all these creative people, but I didn't see them in museums, in galleries, in workshops. There were no spaces for them. So I created a space. My academic background is that I'm a database developer, and I worked manipulating data through different portals in for-profit and nonprofit environments. Mostly, I'm a self-made archivist because I know how to manipulate data. So the other factors, and I'll say this now before we go upstairs, as we talk about quilting, crafting, handwork, I want to dispel all the myths. In every major institution in the world, there's some element of something made with thread from several cultures. It is not resigned as women's work, as grandma's work. Those things came about in the Americas because that's how those who were governing at that time wanted it to be. When we look at our cultures, and this is not to put gender on anything, men are the ones that actually do most of the textile work. Weaving, crochet, tapestry crochet, knitting, on and on and on. Guatemala, Senegal, the tailors, the tapestry crocheters in Morocco, the weavers in Ghana. Each art form has its own place. But in today's contemporary life, we are all engaged in the art forms. So don't look at it as one or the other, and don't define the art forms that way. Okay. So Harlem Needle Arts was founded in 2005, and I was still working at the time and decided to say, just jump on in until I parted ways with the company that I was working with for 12 and a half years. I understand and grew this company out of nowhere. I do not call myself necessarily an artist. I dabble. If my art form had to be defined, it would be crochet first, knitting second, quilting third, sewing fourth. So that's the world I've been in since I was about 3 years old. I used to have to help my aunt sew sequins and beads on wedding dresses, because there was no place to actually go and buy it already in the process. So my hands were always working. Some would say today, as I've been told, let the child be a child. No, culturally, this is how we communicate with each other. An elder and youth sitting together and working on something, whether it be for a ritual or a ceremony. And think about architecture. I looked at some of the people that I am in community with and who are doing great things to talk about space, okay? Lady Sasha Jones, who's Harlem's own, currently working on her PhD at Princeton, is talking a lot about space. What does Harlem look like as we can imagine and reimagine spaces for home, spaces for play, peace, and harmony? Her family migrated from the South up to Harlem, and so she did a piece down at the Shed talking about the work of June Jordan. June Jordan was a poet and an activist who, out of frustration, decided she wanted to imagine what it would look like if Harlem were to have spaces. She was not an architect. However, she approached an architectural company who worked with her, but the project never came to fruition. This is the project as we see it now. Now, the title of this is not the title that was given. This is from Esquire magazine. They decided to call Harlem a slum, okay? That was not her choice. But the project talked about space, green space, community, gathering, peace, harmony. How do we diffuse from the ills of the riots that had happened in 1964? How do we have a voice? We have to also remember culturally, as New York was one of the #1 places that had enslaved Africans, we were, in June was probably the first generation. She was from Panama and someplace, Jamaica, I think, her family. She's the first generation coming out of enslaved people in many cases. So as we look to defining our homes and our futures, maybe she was a little closer to the indigenous culture than some of us were, so she had more to go from, as opposed to maybe those who were just brought from Africa here to the Americas, and they were stripped completely of their soul and their spirit. This is Lady Sasha's work, Black Interior Spatial Thought Project, and she created this wooden structure to be interwoven with each other. And how do you create spaces? I am sorry, I apologize that I don't actually have the structure. I do own it, it's just that I can't find it right now. I encourage you, and I will share with you all a resource list so you can look up all of this information. This is Habitat 67 in Montreal. How many have heard of this space? This is a great space where it was in 1967. I believe the gentleman went through the process of designing it. It was his thesis for school, and then it manifested into what it is today. This space is one of probably the greatest works, you can't get in there, of structure, green space, peace and harmony, to help us to imagine and rest. As we live in this contemporary world, how do we interject harmony into what we do? Okay, so David Adjaye, I hope I pronounced it right. He is a Ghanaian British architect who's done work, he did the Studio Museum. He's also done the Sugar Hill project, which is on 155th Street. He is doing the African burial ground in Barbados. This is a rendering of what it would be like. So some of the factors that he has looked at to incorporate is because it's an island, the sea spray that comes off the water, where the land structure that it's going to be on, how is it going to engage the community? This is a huge undertaking for Barbados because I grew up in a place that was very British. They have since, I don't want to use the word defect, but they have denounced the British throne. So they are totally now truly independent of the British. So they're taking things into their own hands and resurrecting culture and identity. So as a stepping stone to what we can do and how we can grow. This is the Sugar Hill project that he did. Okay, I grew up in Harlem, moved to Dyckman when I was 7 years old. Dyckman project, Dyckman houses. Okay, in this triangle, you see a lot of green. So when we left Harlem and moved to Dyckman, I thought we had moved to the suburbs, okay? because there's so much green space. This was very thoughtful in the process. This opened in like, I want to say 1950s. This is Dykeman today. This is not Dykeman, this one. So Dykeman always had red doors, these are the hallways, and they had a pattern that was painted on the walls. When we think about structure, many housing projects are made with cinder blocks, which is the image at the lower side. That makes the project looks like a jail, okay? The elevators are very small. It's sort of something that doesn't build growth. And the reason why I share this, I am very proud to have grown up in Dykeman. The stigmas that are associated with projects, other people put those on us, so we have to grow out of that. This was a community. This was a community that had gardening competitions because we had so much green space. And now today they have one of the most popular basketball leagues that's being televised all over the world. For those of you who don't know, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is from there, Lisa Martinez, I can go on, Kenny Stevens, Jim Couch, all of those people came out of Dykeman. This is not a tit for tat about NYCHA. This is about how do we as students, as makers, as creators, think about space and people and how they grow into spaces. Where I got this is from a young man who goes to different housing projects and he compares them. Now, there was a lot of cursing in the clip, so I can't play the clip. But basically what he said is like, what is this? They don't do this in other projects. The staircases are clean. All of those things were mandated by a woman named Eloise Carrington, who was my elder at the time, who went down to the NYCHA office and demanded X, Y, Z. She brought community there, and she said, whatever you do other places, it doesn't matter to us. This is what we're doing here, okay? Let's talk about quilting. Quilting in different communities means different things. In India, there's a group of people called the Siddi, S-I-D-D-I. They're the Africans in India. Now, the climate there is different. So what they do is they take their old silk saris and they make a front and a back. And they just basically sew on top and patch the pieces together. They're very bright pieces. The silks are beautiful. And they put these little, I'm sorry that I don't have an image of it, but I'll pull it up when we get upstairs. They put these little pieces of silk on the corners called ticklies. And they use them for the children to motivate their eyes and see where their eyes are going. It's stimulation for them. This quilt was done by one of the women in Gee's Bend. Now, they say they were ahead of their day. Museums, galleries said that the women of Gee's Bend were ahead of their time. These were utilitarian items. They did not see themselves as artists, not even craftspeople. These were used because it was cold. They didn't have any storage. They had no local governmental representatives. They had no libraries. They had nothing. When John McCain was running for president, he went to what were considered all the unforgotten places in the country. Alabama, Gee's Bend was one of them. And he visited this community. The prominence of Gee's Bend now today, some of you may have heard of them, is all over the media. It didn't start out as favorable. It did and it didn't. It was at a museum in Houston. It came to the Whitney here. The women did not see themselves as artists. They basically gave their quilts to a collector named Will Arnett, who was also an attorney. The quilts, this was one of the quilts, there were 10 quilts that were selected and licensed to the United States Postal Service to produce stamps. Now, you have to think about licensing. That's the key word here. Now, how much money do you think you got for licensing stamps, rugs, silk scarves, and all the other things, the books, on and on and on. How much did the women sell their clothes for? I'm just gonna leave it at that. Just know that they're going down in history. They're getting a lot more due. People are respecting them more, and it's not their fault. In many cases, you see me, you're like, why would I want to sit and knit, quilt, do all of that? And as someone once said, why am I going to pay you that much money when I can go to Macy's and buy a bed in a bag? I don't even know if those still exist. So a bed in a bag is like a comforter, sheets, pillow shams, all in one bag. And back in the day, you could get that for like $30. So why would I pay you for something that either is handmade, on and on and on? We are in an industrial age. Why do we need to do that? Because the spirit, the culture, and the soul of what we do is not in Macy's. Has it been in Macy's? Oh, well, yes. They had partnerships. They brought in different cultures. And that happened years ago. They had a store called Blackberry in Macy's on the lower level many years ago. I don't think anyone in this room probably remembers that, but they had a store. The aesthetic of the products that were sold were very much African American, and those were in that store. Recently, they did something with the Native American community. Aquaba Manor, the woman who owns that, had a commission to do different things. They even had a commission with the Women of Jeans Bank to do a particular product. I'm not going to get into manufacturing and things of that nature. That's a very deep another conversation. Signs and symbols. So it is alleged that quilts were made by not necessarily Black people, but by the the abolitionists, white abolitionists that come out of the, having a senior moment. Well, anyway, white abolitionists who were a part of the underground, the safety of the Underground Railroad. And it is alleged that if you saw certain symbols on the clothing line of a quilt, it would say to you, safe house, keep going, go this direction, so that you know where safety is. The reason why I say alleged is that there's some scholars from a particular university who some years ago said, that is a lie. There's no documented evidence that that ever happened. Now, as we all know, enslaved Africans were forbidden from reading, writing, documenting, on and on and on. Much of our history is very oral. Signs and symbols exist in everything. When I was recently in Barbados, I looked at the wrought iron around my aunt's home, which had all of the Sankofa symbols in it, because blacksmithing and the imprint of our legacy, of our history, it continues to exist. You see it all over New York, you see it anywhere you go in the South. So things are very much an oral history. Some refute this, some believe that is true. So these are different signs and symbols, and as you think about constructing, how can you transform some of these designs into patterns, into spaces, things of that nature? I'll come back to the games. I have a number of quilts in this particular presentation, but I'm going to go through them. They're older quilts, they're contemporary quilts. Please let me know when I need to stop. Okay, this is one of the oldest pictorial quilts. This is done by Harriet Powers, who recently actually also has a stamp of this particular quilt. It was launched 5 minutes. It was launched last month. So this is two-part. They're Bible stories, and then there's stories that she's telling in the quilts. This is a quilt that was done in 2018 by an artist, Laura Gaston. She is a teaching artist, and she worked with the seniors at the food bank in New York in Harlem so that they would create a landscape of what sort of the brownstones look like, what the community looks like. So this is all fabric, all done by hand by about, I would say probably about 15 different seniors. This is another piece of her work, Laura's work. This is Jerry Gant. Jerry the late Jerry Gant is a mixed media artist out of New Jersey. He worked with metal, he worked with textile, he dyed, he bleached, he did a number of different aspects in the art world. Another one of his pieces. Okay, this is Ruth Miller. None of this is pink. This is all embroidery thread. Every shade, every symbol is what she does by hand. In the end, it starts, she begins with probably an index card. She shades it. She buys every color and shade of embroidery floss, and she produces the skin tone. This is pink, there's some blues, there's a little bit of yellow to create the brown that she needs for the face of her model. This is done with sewing thread. So embroidery thread is 4-ply, this is single ply. Another Ruth Miller piece. This piece was a commission by the Newberger Museum at Rutgers University, and an artist from Mexico, Teresa Margolis, who went to 6 different places and gave each group a shroud of death. Our shroud came from the Eric Gardner location in Staten Island. Eric Gardner was killed because he was allegedly selling cigarettes. So what she does with the shroud is she takes this white fabric and she puts a certain type of glue on it. She goes to the scene of the crime and she drags the shroud through the area. Then she sanitizes it and then she gives it to us. So then we have to produce the content that's related to the quilt. This quilt is now traveling the world. It's owned by Teresa now, and it was at the Newberger Museum. Each textile, Panama, Mexico, I can't remember the others, the United States, and I can't remember the other 3, but each one was uplit so that you can come into a dark space for what was called, we have a common thread. There was embroidery, there's reverse applique, on and on. A doll making by a jewelry designer. This is Dinga McCannon. Dinga McCannon is a mixed media artist who uses different types of fabric design, printmaking, so that she can produce not only quilts, but 3-dimensional sculptures. Hands Up, Don't Shoot, a quilt by Ife Felix. Valerie Dees, the late Valerie Dees. These are all quilts, and they mimic sort of a jazz scene, sort of a group of people dancing. This is Ife traveled a lot to Guinea, to Senegal, and the boubas that are worn there by the men and women, this is a quilted version of that. This is Teresa Vega. This is also a quilt, but using different fabrics. More of Teresa's work. This is Shimoda Emmanuel. So that piece in the center is made out of wood, and that piece projects out. She uses a lot of found objects. She actually goes around to different designers, and she wants their scrap pieces. Then she puts them together. Sylvia Hernandez. Laura Gadsden again. The Fabric of Emancipation. It was a project that we did where we had to make sure that the work was of the time period of the Morris Jamal Mansion. The Morris Jamal Mansion is where Lin-Manuel wrote part of Hamilton. So it had to be, we had to reimagine what an African-American person of that time period in that region would have been doing, what they were wearing. These are some of the pieces that were a part of that particular exhibition. More. This is Dinga McCannon, who's wearing a piece honoring the women who were part of the original protest against the Whitney Museum. Faith Ringgold. Everybody here knows Faith? You should know Faith. Faith is a City College icon. She graduated from City College. She was a Harlem resident. She was an artist, she was an activist, and she was a part of a group, sorry, let me get the group. We Want a Revolution, it was an exhibit, We Want a Revolution, Black radical women, 1965 to 1985. It was at the Brooklyn Museum a couple of years ago. Phenomenal exhibit, like took the Brooklyn Museum to a whole nother level. Faith was adamant about what she was doing in the art world. She didn't just say, I'm the one, even though most institutions put her up as the one. She always came back to community. Her work is in the Sugar Hill Project on 155th Street. A lot of her work is in the museum because she worked with them during the time that museum was being developed. Zenobia Bailey. This is all crochet art. All single crochet done with acrylic yarn. Chief Nike Kundaye is a Nigerian artist, philanthropist, humanitarian, who is the keeper of traditions of Yoruba art forms, bead art. She has industrial design centers. We curated her work here in Harlem. Most of what we've done has been in Harlem and beyond. This is Mama Nike, as we call her. So this is all indigo dyeing with the indigo plant. Her daughter lives here. So they plant, process, harvest, and then spin fibers, weave, and then do all the finished product themselves in Nigeria. This is a class with her daughter that we did some years ago. This is a Haitian flag. So this is a veve, and it's similar to quilting. It has 3 layers. It has a black back, middle, and a top. Botanical printing. Going into nature in our community, this is all done in Harlem, finding different types of plant life, affixing it to silk with a solution, and printing it onto silk. Eucalyptus, black walnut, certain types of maple leaves. The top right, that's Zenobia Bailey at Hicksville. She had a residency there some years ago. She's the one that did the crochet work. This is felting. That piece is hand felted with a needle. So felt is almost like raw felt or fleece. It's almost like cotton that you can pull apart and place on a surface, and then you manipulate it, you agitate the fiber so that it creates what you need. More felting. This is a piece that we did 37 inches by 10 feet. This is all done with acrylic yarn. It was designed by a crochet artist, Nasanimo, and then it was done, the design was given to an industrial knitting machine company, and they reproduced it. A Long Walk to Freedom. It was paying homage to us being free people in our world on a continuous basis, when many of our liberties are often challenged. Doll making. Alex Reynoso is a crocheter, a knitter, and a ceramicist. This is Nasanimo and his crochet work. This is reverse applique from Panama. This is Nostalgia Swift. Now these are also felted pieces that you see here. Once again, all done by hand and a special needle that she does to create the expression in the faces. If you look very carefully, all the faces are different. It's the same color, different hair, on and on. Doll making. Quilter. Oh, whack, I was supposed to take this out. This film chronicles the history about what really is African textile. Adrienne Cruz, as you look at some of her pieces, she's a quilter, but it looks very different from the pieces that you saw in the beginning. Her pieces remind me of what's the Egungun piece in Nigeria, which are pieces of strips, all different colors, that are part of a ritual and ceremony celebration in Nigeria. Another this quilt. So Harlem Needle Arts was commissioned to do a 14-foot by 30-foot quilt celebrating the African/American landscape of food in the Americas from 1619 to 2019. There are 406 quilt blocks, of which 400 of them have different icons that symbolize something in the history of the food landscape. You mentioned the oyster man. I believe his name was Mr. Bullock. I can't remember. Mr. Bullock, when we think of oysters, most people say, oh, no, that's for the elite. Switch that around. We were the keepers of oysters here in New York. Had his business continued, he would be a gazillionaire today. There was a gentleman in Brooklyn who was trying to bring the affinity back for oysters. I'm not sure if he's still doing it. He had like a cart in Brooklyn, and he was trying to encourage people to understand oysters, the history of oysters, the taste, and so on and so forth.
Real Mother Shuckers.
Real Mother Shuckers, that was the name of it, yes. This was here in New York at the Africa Center on 110th Street and 5th Avenue. That's what one of the individual pieces looks like. These are artists working with students at the Schomburg, embroidery work. This is all done with sewing thread. So sewing thread is very thin. She manipulates it, she designs it, and puts it into glass frame. Doll making, My Brother's Thread. This included the work of only men fiber artists, working in some form of fiber. And this was one of our first exhibitions that we did way back at Lincoln Center, had a community gallery, and they invited us to put in the work. That's it. I forgot to put in one piece. I don't know if you've seen it recently on TikTok or Instagram. In Mexico, there are a group of not only women, but I think some men who are passing on the tradition of crochet. And they have, it is plastic raffia, and different colors of raffia, which they're crocheting, and they created this, this piece that's a shading for an area in Mexico. And one of the reasons they did it is because the traditions are being lost. When we think about doing things creatively, don't just think about the image. There's no rhyme or reason that it has to be this way or it has to be that way. Learn techniques, and one of the most important things that you're going to get out of this is a sense of calm. Our ancestors already had the roadmap for what it meant to have mental wellness through these particular art forms. They're considered rhythmic art forms. Stitching, crocheting, you're doing the repetitive nature, similar to yoga and breathing and techniques. So you have to look at it from a different perspective in terms of how you see the work. Don't think of it, don't shun it. It's meditative, and this is how we have to use our vocabulary. Harlem Needle Arts is 21 years old, and part of our requirement to even become a nonprofit, the IRS required that we had to have proof of that element of our narrative. So the research for this has existed for well over 20 years that we had to provide to document it. Now, 21 years later, yes, I see it all over Instagram, and I'm not on TikTok, but social media, about the same narrative about mental wellness. So when you look at things, when you see your family members, just pinch off a little bit of it and keep it for yourself, so there's something that you can connect with, so that we continue our legacy. There's more to come when we go upstairs. Thank you.
Yay! So maybe save questions for Michelle will be upstairs. Ifeoma, come up here. We're going to give you both a huge round of applause, and the girls are going to take a picture. Yay! Picture, and then just them first. And then now all three of us. Okay, see you in studio, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
You're welcome.